So this is episode 3, which we've already pre-recorded the content of, but we wanted to do some follow-up about our previous episode, episode 2, which was all about JavaScript and your staunch defense of it.
Not staunch enough.
So I didn't actually have anything to follow up on, but have you got a couple of things you wanted to mention?
Yeah, the first thing was that I didn't staunchly defend it enough. I felt when I was listening back that I was a bit of a wet fish and just let you walk all over me.
But I didn't feel like that at all. I thought you made a few good points.
Yeah, no,
Not enough.
I kind of felt like I let JavaScript down a little bit, but I do really like it, and I think it's very good. There we go.
Well said.
The main thing that I didn't defend enough was with the attack, when we discussed the attack where the guy manipulated a dependency.
Yeah. And
we were talking about how many dependencies you have in JavaScript in NPM. So on a project, you'll have like 101 million dependencies, and then you don't know what you're depending on. And as I was re-listening, I was thinking perhaps it's a victim of its own success. And actually, really, when you look at these dependency managers, you've got like, I don't actually know the history of them. Do you know the history of them?
But of all package managers?
Yeah, I don't know. Like the Java ones feel like around the first ones.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's true.
What was there anything before Maven?
Yeah,
but Ant didn't do dependency. That was just XML.
There was another thing which I've now forgotten the name of that attached to Ant. Ivy.
Ivy. Oh, is Ivy the oldest one? Okay.
I think there must be one before that.
Yeah.
But basically, those ones are a bit clunky and difficult to use. And then, in my opinion, Ruby Gems, and I'm probably ignorant of quite a few of these different dependency management systems, but Ruby Gems was pretty good. And then NPM obviously yoinked a lot of functionality from there, and now it's even better. I don't know whether there's anything specific about JavaScript that means that you'll end up depending on so much, other than it's easier to create packages. Because in an ideal world, like we joked about is even and is odd.
Yeah.
But like, because maybe they're too simple. But even the simplest function, I guess there is an argument to be made that it should be written once and then just reused everywhere. Maybe. I don't know. But then I don't know.
I think you could. There's definitely an argument for that. I think whether those simple functions should be just built natively into like as a core library.
Yeah.
So like java.util, right? Nobody's editing that apart from Java, and you only get updates with that when you release a new version of the entire framework, the entire binary, right? So
yes, this was something else I was thinking of, which is that basically one of the reasons that that NPM and JavaScript is more susceptible to this is because it doesn't have a strong core library and a team running that library, which is good and bad because it means anybody can create NPM packages which you can use, and you're not reliant. Like if the Go, I think has quite strong core libraries, and if they just start being rubbish, then that's that. I guess there will still be dependencies, but everybody's using that stuff. I'm not sure really, but it feels a little bit like it's easier to depend on things, and they've made a great dependency management system, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now that's totally not secure and we don't know what code we're running. But actually, if you made Maven really good, then maybe that would be a problem there as well. I don't know, but
I think perhaps the main issue there perhaps is just that there's every package in NPM is classified as equal, right? And maybe there needs to be some sort of system where you say these are critical, and then any change has a lot stricter review policy or something. So then these sort of things can't happen. I mean, I'm not even sure that package would have hit that definition. Maybe it would have done. I don't know how. You could say if it's got over 1,000 dependencies, there's a different process or something.
Yeah, but it is interesting. And like NPM clearly, like I read we put it in the show notes, but I read the like debrief from NPM of what happened, and they seem to take their responsibility quite seriously for deleting it and getting rid of it and fixing it, which implies that on some level they do care about stopping stuff like this from happening. But on another level, as far as I know, there's basically no controls whatsoever as to who puts what in there. Like it's a strange. It's kind of like YouTube or Facebook. Like you've got users that are putting stuff into the system, and if they put something that's like inappropriate or malicious in there, I mean, code's different because it can be malicious. You can't really put a malicious YouTube video up. You can put something like inappropriate or horrible up, and then YouTube might take that down if it's like inappropriate. But they don't really.
But I guess that's interesting, right? Because I actually think that's a really interesting comparison, because I think originally YouTube were just like, well, we just provide the hosting service. We don't care. We don't judge what people upload. But then more recently, they've had to change, right? Because governments are putting pressure or potential regulationally pressure on them. So
and advertisers, I think.
Yeah, and advertisers and all these things. So I wonder whether NPM eventually, whether in a few years there will be it will somehow be different.
It's like an interesting, like the problem, like loosely phrased, is like anybody can create a package and upload it, and anybody can depend on that package.
Yeah.
And when you're depending on packages, you should really go and look at like who made it. You should maybe go and look at the code, but the reality is you just can't. So there's an element of trust, and that trust is blind. And like you say, there's one level of package which is just like you may know that maybe Lodash is a legit thing, but this event stream thing's pretty legit.
But the thing here, right, was just that the guy was like, I don't want to maintain it anymore.
Yeah.
And you can't protect against that, because you're like, well, I know Dave, and he, you could even know the guy and be like, yeah, I'm happy to use that package. And then he goes, I'm not doing it anymore. And I've given it to this other guy, and you know nothing about it. You're not going to immediately remove that dependency, because it's not that easy, right? Because you could be 3 or 4 levels down your dependency tree.
So the thing I thought about is that NPM is, I think, Ruby Gems and Maven, because we were talking about the fact that it has signing, which is a complete pain in the butt, and I didn't say that enough at the time, but that's crazy. That GPG, did you say?
Yeah.
Which is madness. Whereas NPM has actually made that easier, because you just log in with a username and account, which has lowered the barrier to entry. But I think so something else I thought. So NPM is not. It's a bit unfair to single it out, because I think Ruby Gems could also have had this problem, or anything else. It's just that NPM is so widely used. Perhaps there's an argument that the open source community behind the packages in NPM are a little bit fast and loose compared to, say, the Java ones. But I would argue that's just because it's like a vibrant. You kind of want that. You want lots of people creating packages that you can use, but then you have to decide which ones not to use, and the tooling's not really there. The other thing it made me think about is how big enterprises, which I'm sure we've both worked at, they have their own package management mirrors. So they'll have their own Maven mirror, presumably these days their own NPM mirror, and they will be picking which packages and which versions go in. So something like this, they should not have mirrored that version if they were doing it right. And then what it made me think was, has anybody created, and it's called an NPM package registry, but has anybody created one where a centralized set of people look at all the versions of the packages and say, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem legit. Like, what's going on? Or like, we trust this person, but we don't trust that person. Or has anybody actually made an effort to like check for malicious code? I know GitHub has that new thing where, I don't know if you've seen it, but on some of my repos, I log in to the repo and it's like, whoa, you've got loads of packages which are bad. And it tells me. It like tells me. I wonder if anyone's done anything like that for NPM, and whether this could have been spotted. But it feels like a new thing. But I haven't seen anything for any of them that would solve it. So that was I just thought it's an interesting problem.
I actually think we got to the crux of the problem for me. Actually, I think we mentioned in the episode is it's just the fast and looseness with the versioning, right?
Oh yeah, that doesn't help.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree. I think if you had that similar casualness with patch versions in any of the other package managers, you could easily upgrade to a version you weren't aware had changed between builds or something.
It's actually mad. It's a really difficult problem, because if you depend on 30 packages, which is a very low number when you think about transitive packages, it's probably hundreds or thousands. Imagine how many unique GitHub and NPM accounts there are linked to those. And so the security of your project and your dependencies is dependent on none of those accounts getting compromised.
Yeah.
And the number of accounts is like probably in the hundreds.
And have they all got 2FA and have they...
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, you can look after that for yourself, but just because TJ or whatever he's called's account gets, hacked, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, everything. So I think sort of a registry or some sort of lag on the packages whilst there. But it kind of makes sense it's something that NPM could maybe just do themselves, and they can have a separate registry, which is like, look, this doesn't have everything in it, but it has stuff which we've sort of vetted or...
So that's interesting, because that's like then how the main Linux distributions work, right? Like CentOS and Ubuntu, they have their main repo, and then they have like their extras, or I can't remember what they call it in CentOS. So you've got like your core ones, and then if you need extra stuff, you add that one in separately, and they're tracked they're not as monitored as aggressively as those core ones.
Yeah.
And I think that would be quite good. Or whether you have like a slower stream, like stable and beta wouldn't be the right definitions, but you could have more of a lower, like you say, a lagging one that takes at least a month before it catches up. Or
it feels like, I don't know if enterprises are still maintaining their own repositories, but it feels mad if they are. If they're not, if it feels like someone should just do this once, or I can understand actually that if you're one company and another company might have a preference about what isn't acceptable, but it feels like there should be a base repository that they should be pulling on from that has a base level of security applied, and then they can further remove things from there.
Yeah, rather than just
I bet they will maintain it themselves though.
Yeah, they won't. Yeah, right. Yeah, I bet you there is, because they'll just be taking in npm and then filtering, I would imagine.
I told a friend of mine this idea today, and he said, "That's a really good idea. That sounds like the most boring thing."
Yeah.
In the way, it does sound really dull. Starting that company,
reviewing all JavaScript modules that you're going to add,
just like looking at all the diffs and being like, "It's okay," and I trust this guy.
But even if the first thing you were going to do is import React, right? Like, I wonder what its dependency tree is, or does it not have a lot of dependencies?
I think deliberately it doesn't.
That's good.
It's my feeling, although now I need a fact check. I think a lot of like Lodash, I think, doesn't have any,
right.
or
so those would be easy ones to start with, right?
Yeah. It's the ones that are more high level though, where all of a sudden it's depending on left pad, and I guess it's an interesting problem. It's like the idea of reusing software is like a very core good idea, but then if you reuse too much and it's someone else's, then
but it's trust alongside that, right?
Yeah, you need trust too.
Yeah,
and that's really hard when you've got like minor patches.
Yeah,
because something I don't think I stressed in the last one enough is that like if you'd have locked in a specific number of this thing, then you wouldn't have been susceptible to when the guy released a minor patch.
Yeah.
But if there'd have been a critical security flaw in the existing version and a good developer had released a minor patch with a security fix, you also then wouldn't have got that security fix.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like there's literally nothing you can do unless you're reviewing these things all the time.
I guess for enterprise, if they're internal facing websites, those security flaws are going to be less important. But yeah, for public facing websites, in a big enterprise, you're going to want to get those as often as possible, right? So yeah, I think it is difficult, and I think you're right. I think I could see that Maven and those other ones could be as easily susceptible. They're just not. And perhaps it's interesting that the reasons for it not, perhaps they're just a bit less successful.
Yeah.
Or less easy to actually add packages in the first place.
Or maybe the developers that add the packages are a different breed of developers.
Yes, which is what I think we mentioned that in the episode.
I think it's a combination of those factors. Like, it's not quite as successful, it's not as easy to do things, and then the developers are perhaps a little bit more sensible. Or they're more likely to be like founded. Like Java does. I know I haven't been in Java's environment for at least 3, 4, 5 years. But before it did not have a vibrant community like Ruby on Rails, and where like a bloke maintains a thing, it's more like the Apache, a team, or like, and then it's kind of more serious, and you can, I think that'll do then.
Yeah. So is those are the points, don't you?
Yeah, I think that's good.
So something that you've had some experience at the moment with, or experiencing at the moment, is interviews for programmers.
Yeah, so getting people hired.
Yeah. I'm going to let you decide where to take this.
Yeah, so the reason that this has come up recently for me is I had a team of developers that I trained from scratch for like on average, probably about 2 years. And I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore, so they've all had to go and find jobs. And I've been helping them find jobs for a couple of months whilst we were winding down the business. And it's been really interesting. As somebody so all of these guys were trained on something which I guess resembles like a coding boot camp. They were trained, in my image. So they're kind of by this kind of course I wrote. And then they've kind of worked on the job for probably, let's say, on average, 1.5 years. And now I'm watching them get jobs. And they don't have computer science degrees like I do, and we have seen some interesting hiring practices in the 3 people needed to get hired, and I've been watching them, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what I've seen and see what you think about what you think a good hiring practice is and isn't, and what we think employers should be doing, because I think we've both hired people.
Yep.
hired and firing. That's our. But no. So what have we seen?
I have fired people too, unfortunately.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
think
very nice.
I have.
So in terms of by interesting, I assume you're being politically correct. Do you mean bad?
Yeah, some bad.
Right.
So let's just we won't name names.
Well, let's just start. I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what you.
So let me tell you what I've seen. So I've seen some coding tests, a lot of coding tests. I haven't actually done that many coding tests, and coding tests from quite a big startup here in London. One of the bigger ones. Most, if you're in London, you'll have probably, or in the UK, you'll have probably used their app. And they basically asked one of the guys that worked for me to do a code test, which they said would take 4 hours. But I looked at it and he looked at it and we agreed. I think if I'd have done it, bearing in mind that he's sort of a junior to mid-level developer, I think for him it's probably 10 or 12 hours of work, and they said 4, and I think I wouldn't have done it in less than 8.
Wow.
So it's a lot of work. It's like a full day, and it was like building 2 screens from their site. So they're a company that does kind of they help you find out where you need to go. So kind of like Google Maps. You know, like when you want to take like a bus or a train, that kind of thing. And they had this. They kind of what they've done is they've taken parts of their actual application, which looks beautiful because it's been properly designed, and they were like, "Please build this for us."
What, in a website?
In a website, in like the text. So we use React and Redux, all of that tech. Good code quality. They wanted tests. They wanted 2 screens. They didn't ask for too much functionality, to be fair, and they wanted the styling to be bang on what the picture of the real app looked like. So they wanted the styling like really good.
Wow.
And that was what they were asking for. They're quite a big one, and I'd imagine perhaps they're filtering on. But yeah, I wasn't overly impressed with that.
That's a lot. That's a long coding test. That's too long.
It's too long. Is what we all felt and what I felt.
How much effort did he put into it in the end, or he just didn't do it?
So he put about 6 to 8 hours in, and I think they really wanted to hear that it took 4. They
wanted him to lie that he didn't spend.
They kind of do, which I find really strange. That they kind of say it should take 4. What you're supposed to do? Turn up and say, "Oh, it took like 15," because then you sound like you're an idiot. But it clearly was going to take more than 4. So I don't know whether they're expecting you to lie, or whether
they're expecting you to realise that it's more than 4 hours.
Yeah, or they just...
they don't have any idea.
The thing is with hiring, that I've been trying to explain to all these guys, is that there isn't necessarily a very good feedback loop, because candidates are not going to be super honest with prospective employers, because you're not going to go to an employer and go, "This was really difficult and it took me much longer than you said," because you're basically going to you're going to feel like you're going to blow your chances of getting that job. So I don't know whether they just don't get the feedback of like, "Hang on a minute, guys, like and they also don't really have an incentive. Like it kind of rules out people that can't be bothered. So I guess from there, if you're getting flooded with applications of sort of developers that aren't that good, setting an impossibly long, difficult code test will find you the triers at the very least. Maybe the triers, the people that are really, the keynotes, the people that are going to be really keen. So that's one thing we can talk a bit more about. I've seen a couple of kind of more complex coding tasks done live. Yeah. So I want to get this right. It's for quite a reputable consultancy company in London or the UK who have quite a good reputation of having good developers. And they asked to implement something which evaluates things lazily. I can't remember the exact what it had to do. But
right.
It was kind of a lazy evaluation problem, which is, like a kind of slightly computer sciencey thing, but given to someone without a computer science degree. And they wanted to code it whilst they were watching him do it.
Yeah.
Which I think I'm okay with the task. I think there was like about 30 minutes to do it. So quite tight time. Yeah. Which I'm not a massive fan of. Like, when you're programming in real life, how many times is there someone standing over you going, "Have you done it yet? Is it actually done?" Like, sometimes, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah, it's not a great environment if you're in somewhere where that is happening.
And if you're junior, I think it depends on the type of person. We went through a university system which we did coding tests live. We had about 3 hours, and we sat in a lab and did them.
Yeah, isolated. Yeah.
Isolated, yeah. So that's another thing I've seen. I've seen random language specific questions,
Yeah.
like
To see if you know the language.
which version of Node did blah blah blah.
What?
Yeah, so like asking specific.
What version of Node had the spread operator?
Yeah, it's stuff like that.
Well, that's a ridiculous question.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I've seen. I'm trying to think what other questions. There's been a few like that. A few, because you said JavaScript had loads of old features that are, you wouldn't want to use.
Yeah.
They would ask really specific questions about the problems with the old JavaScript, which no one in their right mind would use.
Like the triple equals false null.
Yeah, like
true
random, like what happens in this case?
Yeah,
It's like, well, no one's, no. I'm trying to think of an exact example, but there have been a few like that where they've kind of asked things. A couple of things they got asked that I didn't know, so I was kind of like, well. And I don't know whether these companies, they expect... It's almost like trivia kind of questions. So I've seen a few of those. I do think there is some value in trivia questions, because if somebody says... If you said to me, hi, if I come to you and I say, I want a job, I'm Richard, I've worked with Node for like 3 years, I think you should be able to ask me a breadth of questions about Node. And maybe I won't know them all, but if I know none of them...
You'll get a sense of if you know them.
Yeah, and if I know none of them... That's probably a problem.
Yeah.
Because maybe what I'm saying is not true.
Yeah.
So I do kind of understand. It's not necessarily important whether they know specific answers. It's just important that they have familiarity with some of these things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I don't. The problem is I think for the junior guys, they don't know where. I keep saying to them, when someone asks a question, you don't know whether they're expecting you to know the answer or whether they're looking for a spread. But I think as the interviewee, you feel like you should know all the answers to all the questions, which maybe isn't true. I don't know what you think.
So the first thing is, in terms of asking questions, I think as an interviewer, you want to know how much they know. So to do that, you have to go. You realistically have to get to a point where they don't know the answer to something.
Agree. I said this to. I completely agree.
Because otherwise, if you're just asking them simple questions, everyone's going to know the simple ones, and you don't know the difference between somebody who's Googled it and who actually has real world experience.
You have to break them down.
Well, yeah, you have to get to the point where you're like, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. So if you're, if I was doing it in KDB, it's very easy to get to that. I could, off the top of my head, think of 3 or 4 questions. If you've never done it before and just Googled around it, you're going to run out.
Yeah,
you're not going to know the answer, right? So there's that. I think in terms of the coding tests, I think, so what we did when we were hiring is we used, I don't think it exists, but Codility.
Mm-hmm.
I
think it does.
Yeah. And basically an online system where you can pick 2 or 3 questions. It takes them approximately, gives them an hour or an hour and a bit to answer those questions, and you get to see the output and they get to run it against some tests basically. And the nice thing about that was they tended to be just generic sort of logic questions. You could either have easy ones or difficult ones or a mix and match.
Yeah. Some of the hard questions on there are hard.
Yeah, and I guess we were hiring junior people as well, so it was more just to get a sense of, I guess from that point of view, you're trying to see can they code, because those things are generic enough that they could probably look them up. It's just to get a sense of formatting, layout, trying to see some sort of progress in their thinking.
Yeah.
And I feel like that. I feel like you're going to get more, and that's why. Sorry, I also like the live testing to some degree as an interviewer. Although we never did it, that thing where you're watching them, because at least you get to see the way they're thinking, which is in some ways more important than how they actually code. Because you can teach them how to code better, but teaching people how to think logically about a problem is very hard.
Yeah.
And so, I think if I was doing it again, I would focus more on maybe having a short online test with somebody. But by short, I mean 30 minutes. And again, you've got to have a difficult enough question that some people aren't going to get it, because you need to be able to
distinguish.
Yeah, you need to be able to distinguish.
Mm-hmm.
But I would always say in those sort of live interviews that, look, you're not going to get to the end of this, or we're not expecting you to get to the solution.
I think I've seen a chronic like failure of a lot of these companies to really set expectations, especially for junior people, like by saying things like, look, this might seem pretty hard, but don't worry, just sort of
do as much as you can,
do your best, or see how far you get, and that's fine. We're not necessarily, because with this one that I was talking about before, we had a lot of in-depth discussions, like maybe they don't expect you to finish it, or maybe if you just say, well, I did this, and it wasn't. That one's difficult because it's open-ended. You can spend as much time on it as you want, so it's not capped, which will then mean that a candidate can spend 16 hours doing this thing.
And that's the thing, and that's the big problem with that, is that it's open-ended. So it's like, well, you could have somebody spend 3 days on it and get something that looks good, but somebody could have spent 4 hours and got 80% of the way there. Which is the better candidate?
Yeah. So
the latter for me.
The guy I know is doing the latter, but I don't know how it's being perceived. So he kind of takes his attitude of like, my time isn't. I mean, if someone sent you a coding test and it said 4, 5, 6, 8 hours, but you felt it was going to take you 12, 16 hours to do a good job, are you doing it?
No.
But I don't think I would. I don't think I would do. If somebody sent me, if there was a job interview and they were saying we need you to do a 4-hour coding test, I'd say I won't do it.
Mm.
And I mean, unless
what if it was paid? What if they said? What if I said, oh, we're going to interview you or whatever, and then they said, oh, Jas, we'll pay you like a sensible day rate.
Then I would definitely consider it, mainly because they
make a living.
Well, you're just going back, just going around.
What's your career? I interview for jobs.
Yeah. But there's something really interesting about if they said they pay you, right? Because it means they value your time.
Yeah, it's a different gesture. I actually think I'm in the same boat. I think
because the problem is if you're saying right, you'd like to work for us, that's great, but we want to know how good you are, fine. But then we want, assuming you're still working full time, we want you to take 4 hours or 8 hours out of your busy life to do a test for us. And it's very self-centered.
And the problem is with some of these bigger companies doing this is I think they're interviewing anyone and anyone.
Yeah.
And so
they might not really have a HR department, or the HR department isn't very good, and they're just offloading it to the tech people.
Yeah, exactly. Or vice versa, where their engineers' time's really valuable, so they're like, we'll just do a coding test. We'll put the burden on the candidate. Yeah. And again, it's not. One of the guys that works for me, he was making the point of, if a company's like that and they're doing things like this when they want to hire you, is that a company you necessarily want to work for? And I'm not sure. I think there is some. I think in general that sort of sounds sensible, but I think sometimes hiring, because the feedback loop is not great, I think companies which could be quite good to work for, their hiring might be a bit dodgy.
Yeah.
I think companies that are really switched on, like the Google and Facebooks of this world, they really understand that they are only the sum of their talent and financial services companies in London. And so they do kind of have it together. I don't know, I'm saying that. A lot of interview experiences I've had haven't been great over the years, but
I've heard, you hear reasonably bad things about things like Google as well, because
whiteboard exercises is the one.
Yeah. But no, just in like the whole interview process, you've got these recruiter people who work directly for Google that would just screw you around and stuff, because I guess they can, because they have a different problem, right? Where they have a lot of people applying all the time.
They need to have a good filter to get the best candidates and find out who they are. And that's, I think, with these long code tests, we've seen it less from smaller startup companies. But I think in general, though, code tests where you code a thing. So I think it depends on seniority. So you said you wouldn't do one unless maybe if you were paid, because it shows you value in your time. I think I'm pretty much in the same boat. I think and it's interesting, I don't get asked. I mean, I probably apply for more jobs because I kind of freelance / contract. I'm perpetually unemployed, effectively, like on and off. So you kind of, you'll be getting new contracts, and it's kind of like, getting new jobs all the time. And just don't get asked, actually, is what happens to me, because you have a reputation and a CV and a set of companies you've already worked for, and people and a degree from a good uni, hopefully, and then people sort of say, well, yeah, we assume you can do this. And I guess contracting as well, perhaps they say, and if you can't, then we'll fire you in 2 days. So it's kind of...
They have that get out clause, right?
Yeah, and you kind of go on reputation. When we were at the beginning of our careers, I don't know if you can remember, and we were applying to all those stupid investment bank websites. Do you think you'd have done it then? I think probably I would have. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. Because you got less of a track record if someone said... Because those... do you remember you used to do those analytical reasoning tests for those?
Yeah.
Oh, what a bunch of
Yeah.
tripe that was.
Yeah.
So maybe... And those forms often took 2 to 3 hours to fill in.
But I think that's different because that was a generic entry point, right? Like we're talking, if assuming here we're talking specifically around what we are talking about, programmers specifically.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think my point to it would be you don't hire junior people unless you're willing to take somebody to take them under their wing and mentor them. At which point, if you're saying we want to hire junior people, you then have to have the people who are going to be mentoring having the time to interview them in the first place. Mm-hmm. Because taking in junior people is not a free resource, right?
Yeah.
You're taking in junior people because okay, you don't have to pay them as much, fine, but you have the other side of that is that you have to spend time making them better.
Yeah.
And the only way you do that is by having senior people taking time out of their development to spend time with these guys.
So there has been a lot of talk on Hacker News about how almost all companies don't want to hire junior. What they want is senior developers all the time.
Yeah.
But then there's this chicken and egg problem where senior developers are mainly made out of junior developers that become senior.
Yeah, yeah.
And it does feel, watching these guys try and get hired, especially in London, there's currently a debate we're having where in the smaller cities, actually, I think it's perhaps there's speculation between them that it's actually a little bit easier, right. And that in London everybody wants senior, but for whatever reason, because it's more competitive, I'm not sure. But
I think people don't want to put the effort into junior developers.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. Speaking firsthand, it is.
But you were taking in people with no experience. We're talking about taking in people with some, not a lot.
But by the end, they were effectively in that place, and it's still it's quite a full-on thing. I mean, it was if I'd have just had one junior developer instead of 4, perhaps.
But assuming as well that they're going into a team of say 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
You've got to say we want to get somebody in, and between the 4 of us, we're going to spend say an hour each a week.
If you have a good junior person and it's like a 1-to-1 ratio where a senior developer is buddied up with the junior and the junior is competent, like maybe they don't know everything today, but they're smart, I think it's completely fine. Mm. If they're not so smart and switched on, then it can be, we have, well, maybe not all, but I'm sure many people have had that feeling where you get an intern at work and after like the end of the first week, the intern's there, you go home and you're like, why am I just so tired and I don't feel like I got anything done? And then it's because that bloody intern turned up and they've been asking me things all week. And I think...
But that's what I mean. So you don't... that was the problem I always had with that sort of setup in my first place, is that you're taking these guys in, but nobody really wants them. They just feel they have to take them.
They had a rotation system, didn't they?
Well, they had summer interns that would come in for 8 weeks and not really do anything. And then they have, when you graduated, you have the 6 month. But to be fair, in both of my 6-month placements as a graduate, both of the teams, I got stuck in and they were like, we've basically got you as like a full-time person. Yeah, so we need you to do this thing and learn how to do it. But they were definitely later on when I was in my permanent team there, they were like, they were basically passing these CVs around being like, who wants a 6-month person? And you're like, well, we could have one, but it's like, well, let's not take one unless we actually know what we want to do.
The funny thing is when I think about my career and I'm sure yours as well, but the people that really took us under their wings and taught us things, you don't necessarily stick around with them that long. Of my sort of 8-year career and your 8-year career, I think each of us maybe spent 2 or 3 years with the same people that really got to benefit. And when you got better, they were like, oh, good, I'm benefit. And then you leave. And so it's almost, it's a strange, like paying it forwards kind of a service that these people are doing. But that company, let alone that person, might not reap the benefits of. So I can kind of understand why they...
But if you're in if you're in a big organisation as a full-time employee, the benefit for yourself personally, that's not really that important, right? Like, if you're taking on a graduate person as a full-time employee worried about things like reviews and stuff, the fact that you have that person is going to be a positive. They're never going to be like, why have you taken that full-time person and why are you looking after them and mentoring them? That junior guy. I think that's always going to be a positive. As for a company as a whole, you could say, well, you've got a person who doesn't know anything, plus you're then losing 20% of the person who does know the stuff, that person's time as well. So the company as a whole is losing out. But assuming you're in a big enough company, it should be able to swallow that loss.
Yeah, I think...
But you're right, there's nothing stopping you then saying, thanks, I've learned everything I need to learn here, now I'm going to go and do this somewhere else, which is, to some degree, what I did.
Yeah, me too.
But that was more because... But I think having left after I did, like you were saying as well, that was more because you come in as the most junior person. Yeah. You then get better, but your status in the team doesn't necessarily change.
Yeah, that's
because you're always seen then as a junior guy, and you're like, well, actually now I might have been in this particular role as long as some of you guys, and so I know as much about this specific application as the rest of you.
Yeah,
I just don't know as much about the underlying technology, but I know I can get around here very, very quickly. Yeah. So that the reason I left my first place, we were where I first learned KDB, it was a big team of say 12 or 15 people. And then I left to join a team of 2 where I was the most senior person and a guy that didn't know any, that I had to train up. The reason I did that was because I was learning KDB, the language, but the actual application we were developing on was very stable and well set. There wasn't anything major that we were doing. It was just sort of like, it exists. We're making fixes here and there, migrations here and there, nothing major. Whereas actually I wanted to go away and do a lot of that core stuff myself.
Yeah.
Where I could do by leaving. So I was like, well, I can't do that here, even though I've learned how to do it all here by looking at what's been done. So I don't know. It's
career progression is not particularly linear from junior to senior in dev world. It feels like to me, it's kind of like you start off and you're junior, and then all of a sudden you get quite good. And I think sometimes it can happen quite quickly, and then you're worth quite a lot more to companies. I mean, it still takes time. There's still a bit of a lag whilst your pay increases. But I think in general, it's kind of like when I've been looking at jobs to kind of help them find jobs, the difference, there's like a big gap between a junior developer and a senior developer in wages, but getting from junior to senior actually doesn't take many years.
There's no mid-level developer.
Mid-level developer you do see it mentioned, I've been looking, but it is kind of not really a thing. And I think actually that's just a nature of how it kind of works. You just don't really, maybe if you're it's kind of like adolescence in life. You are an adolescent, but not for very long. You're kind of a child for quite a while, and then you're an adult. And it's kind of the same with developers. There's this transition where you're kind of like junior, mid, senior. It's just kind of, you're just mid for a tiny amount of time.
I guess maybe you shouldn't even really be talking about them as sort of junior and senior. It's more just you've got people who know the technology and then people who are learning the technology. And then at the point where you've learned, because there's 2 things, right? There's the technology that you're using, and then there's the actual specific application that you're working on, right? And you can know one very well and the other not very well.
I think there's a third. So I think there's those 2, and I think there's probably a third thing, which is sort of general problem-solving ability.
Yeah.
I think that's the third thing.
Yeah.
And
which I think as a developer you need to be good at.
Yes, and that is something which is interesting when you talk about self-taught people, or not self-taught, but non-university. I think that problem-solving stuff, there's not a lot written about it. Something that I'd really like to do one day is write a course of how to solve problems without really talking about specific programming languages. It's something I've become aware of through teaching other people, but I do like second nature, but I can't even verbalize to them how I'm doing it. I've tried to, but I feel like I've done a pretty poor job on balance. But there is something, it's to do with taking bigger problems and breaking them into smaller problems that can eventually, like you have a problem which is, you just think I can't solve that problem. And you think, if I were to break it into 3 problems, what 3 problems might get me from A to B? And then you look at those problems and say, Problem one, I think I know how to do that. Two, I know how to do that. Three seems difficult, and then you break that into more smaller problems until all of the problems are problems that you're quite comfortable you can solve, and then you just go and solve them all. But it's saying it like that makes it sound easy, but there's some choosing how to break up the problems is like something that feels more like an art than a science. It's kind of,
and that's, coming back to the interviews you're saying we're doing. That's what they were testing, right? They were testing problem solving.
Yeah.
Verbal reasoning, that sort, and mental arithmetic and all those things. They were trying to get a sense of how do you solve problems, because those things are in an abstract testable more than what do you know about programming language X?
I think some of the more time algorithmic style tests, time bound, so like you've got an hour. The codility tests, I think, are more along those lines. Maybe you can get some code formatting, but I think it depends on the job and the type of person you want as to whether you want to test for that. Another type of testing. So far we've got quite long coding tests where they say build a website or build the thing that you might build day to day. There's kind of asking random questions like trivia of like what version of Node in 1994, just those kind of questions. There's timed code tests which are quite algorithmic.
Yeah.
And then I think there's kind of what I would call whiteboardy computer sciencey stuff, which some of the...
What, are you thinking like Big O notation?
Big O notation, write me an algorithm to sort a binary tree, quick sort, that kind of... Jas is pulling a face for Philip. For Philip who's listening.
I think all of that's a waste of time.
I think it depends on the job, but
Yeah.
I broadly think it's also a waste of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you're Google and you're working on like something,
Yeah.
I think about 2% of software engineering jobs involve those types of skills, and for those 2% of jobs, you should interview like that. But
So how many?
98%.
Because like I'm not sitting writing code thinking what is the Big O notation of my list iterator.
You will 2 days a year.
Yeah, exactly. But for me, it's that classic thing it's that classic case of over engineering.
Yeah.
Like when you're solving a problem. Initially, you don't need to optimize to the nth degree. Yeah. You need to get the thing working, and then later down the line, you go, you know what? This for some reason, this iteration is taking hours to iterate over a list of 1,000. You go, well, that's clearly not right. What the hell's going on here? Let's optimize it.
And then you apply your big O.
But then you can just look it up and be like, what's the problem here? And then you go, oh, well, maybe we should switch to searching rather than just iterating through the list. And you go, okay, well, let me just do a find, and I'll find something that does.
I would argue that big O and sort of general optimization is not used that regularly, but it does get used, and I have.
Oh, I'm not saying it's completely pointless. I'm saying for the, like you said, most of the time, you're not needing that.
So those skills I would say are used infrequently, but are probably used in quite a lot of jobs. But then there's stuff like can you write the algorithm to insert into a binary, like an ordered binary tree, and then you need to rearrange all the nodes so that it's still ordered, and you need to write like a recursive algorithm to do it. Like I have been to an interview where I've been asked that.
Yeah, it's like ones like how do you find a loop in a linked list or something like that.
Yeah, and you're just like, that is different. That is not an average programmer deals with that 2 days out of 365. That is like most programmers have jobs where that's just not a thing that they're going to need to look at, like ever. And there's 2% of programmers in general who have jobs that sometimes may require that, and probably still doesn't. I doubt anyone has a job writing binary tree insertion algorithms daily. That just doesn't seem like a thing unless they're work in a computer science department.
This reminds me of a story. Actually, I did an interview at a company, hedge fund here in London, and one of the questions, I went in and they were like, you got to do these questions. I said fine, and the first question was for a particular, for a number, return the number of bits in the bit interpretation of this number that are set to 1. So for like 2, it would be the bits would be all zeros and 1 1.
So the answer is 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were like, write that, and I was like, okay, but Java ints have that as a built-in function,
and they were like, no,
which is just it's literally something like num bits 1 or something.
Yeah.
So I was like, but obviously why wouldn't I use that? But they obviously they got in a fuss about it because they were like, why did you use that? And you're like, well, because it's written and it's a library function. Why would you not use that?
It's reliable.
But this is the problem, right? Is that you'd be like,
it's contrived is the word I would use.
Yeah.
They're basically making you fight with your hands tied behind your back to stress you mentally, which maybe is valid.
But it'd be like saying, if I interviewed somebody and they were like really, really good, but then I was like, right, how do you do a quick sort? And they said, I don't know. And I'm like, well, please leave. It's like, it's completely unfair.
It's bizarre.
Like, if I wanted to sort something, I'm going to just Google what's I want a quick sort in Java.
You're gonna sort using the standard library, which presumably uses
sort
of whatever they decided was best, and they're smarter than you. So you're just like, yeah.
Does the list have a sort on it? Probably does it?
Lodash has sort and sort by, and so I think
I know Java has tree sets, so you can be like, I want all the keys to be in alphabetical order.
There'll definitely be.
And it's just like, and that's what I mean. But I guess that's more of perhaps a pragmatic way of programming and understanding programming for us, where I think we touched on it earlier. You don't need to necessarily understand how every single thing works. And again, in a difference perhaps to me and you, I like sometimes to know how that stuff works.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to sit there reinventing the wheel every time because I like writing a quicksort function.
Like sometimes, for example, like yesterday, I was writing some code, and it really turned out I was trying to traverse a structure that wasn't like a list. It was more of like a graph. So it was like it was more like a tree, or a kind of, it was like an object with other nested objects that could be infinite levels deep in theory. Although realistically they're only like 3 levels deep, but that's not the point. And I ended up writing like a recursive algorithm to like get what I wanted out of that, and to like get the answer I wanted, because that was like a neat way of solving that problem. And that particular problem was bespoke, and I wasn't going to, the answer wasn't like merge sort or something.
Yeah.
It was like, so I guess it kind of is helpful to have these tools in your arsenal. But then again, like I watched developers that did not have a formal computer science education, and it was so rare for them to bump into these problems where all you really need is to know when you're beat and to know what you need to do next. You don't need to know the answer off the top of your head. You don't need to be able to go, this is it.
You need to understand that you don't know the solution.
Yeah.
And that and generally if something's particularly complicated, you should always at least consider that there's an easier way of doing something. Because you're like, this feels complicated. I do that myself a lot. Sometimes I'll write something, this feels complicated. But sometimes the easy solution isn't there. So you have to write it in a more complicated manner to then look at it and go, oh yeah, now I can see what I've done, and now I can rewrite it. Analyzing and rewriting your own code, I think is something that I do a lot.
Yeah.
I'd never just write something. I rarely write something once if it's reasonably involved and go, well, that's it.
Yeah.
I will look at it and go, oh yeah, I don't really like that.
Especially if it's slightly tricky.
Yeah.
You end up looking at it. If it's easy, you write and you're like, yeah. And then if it's hard, you write and you think, it doesn't look right. I've noticed actually from teaching other people that a really critical skill is being able to detect when you've not done something right. Because if you don't know that if you know in your heart of hearts and you look at it and you just feel that little bit of sadness in there, then you can improve. Maybe you don't know what you need to do, but you know that you're not doing it right. When you run out of that feeling, that's when you're not going to be able to get better. And I'm sure all of us run out. I'm sure there are other programmers that are way better than me, and they would look at my code and they would get that little sinking feeling of like, Richard's like made a hash of this. And like, whereas I look at it, I go, that's beautiful. And so it's kind of like the key skill that almost any junior mid-level programmer needs is to be able to see that when they're not doing things optimally. And then from there, you can start to think, what is it I'm doing it wrong? What is it I don't like? Well, maybe you just know you don't really like it, and 3 months later you see someone else do it better, and you think that is what I've been missing in my life, and then you do it better. But when you don't know, because
I guess code review there would help a lot in an organisation, right?
Yeah.
You got junior guys coming in, and again, we do code reviews in our company now, and they're basically a waste of time because well, they're not a waste of time, but there's a lot of code reviews where they just get sort of approved, people having a cursory glance. When you've got junior people in, you need people doing code reviews that are actually going to sit there and look at the code.
You need to take them to town, yeah.
Yeah, you need to be, brutal isn't the right word, but you need to be verbose about your feedback.
Yeah.
You need to be like, this is what I do not like about your code. And I'd maybe argue not commenting just in the code review, but actually going over and running through it with them interactively might be better. Or maybe my preference would actually be to write them all down and then review the comments with them in person.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of having that really slow back and forth in the little reply in the
comments.
Yeah. But I think you have to be willing to do that. You've got to be willing to do that time to make these guys better. And I think that starts at the hiring point. I know we've come around, quite a long way around, but if you're not willing to spend the time hiring the right people, and the people who are going to be looking after them not being involved in the hiring, what's the point? Because if you're the manager and I'm sat here developing, and you go, "Hey Jas, here's this guy we've hired. Go nuts." I'll be like, "Who the heck? This is the first I'm hearing of it."
You want to know?
I'll be like, "Well, who the hell have we hired? Why am I? I don't know anything about him. You've decided he's quite good. I needed to have been involved to say, look, I can work with this guy and make him good and make him valuable to this company."
Yeah, that buy-in's important. So
I don't think you get that in a lot of places. Well, bigger places that you're just going to have a more centralised hiring.
Well, I've been telling all of these guys that are looking for jobs that if it comes to the point where they're thinking about accepting an offer, if they can, they should try and meet every single person that they would work with directly before they accept. Because
That's a good idea.
Who you work with day to day can make a massive impact on your morale and your job
Absolutely.
satisfaction. It's massive.
Absolutely.
It's massive. If one person's like a bit of an arsehole, it could be gay. You're just sat there. You come home and you're like, oh, Dave was at it again today. He really likes semicolon. No, wherever it is. But so I think we're not fans of the computer sciencey binary tree bollocks. Basically,
That's having done it and then realised, having studied them, and then them not being a regular occurrence in our day-to-day programming lives, I think you have to be pragmatic about it and think, what's the point asking about it?
I interviewed at a place once where I knew they were going to ask me all that stuff for a firm, and I went to a kind of like a library, not a library, and I studied and made notes and basically revised. This was about 3 years into my career. I basically revised binary trees. I actually had to learn some new things that we didn't learn at university. So there's like this thing called red-black trees or something.
Yeah. I've heard of them. I don't know.
I made notes of them and now completely forgotten them. I had to learn extra things, and they did actually ask me like to write the insert algorithm and to write and it's just kind of like.
Also, I mean, that's a fair point there. Writing code on a piece of paper.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's unacceptable in this day and age.
I don't know if I mind. Do you know what? I don't.
It's got to be. I mean, it's got to be pseudocode at best.
So there are some interview questions I really like.
Being written onto a piece of paper.
Kind of, yeah, onto a whiteboard. So the one I like that's
a whiteboard perhaps more so than a piece of paper.
Piece of paper is particularly unforgiving. It's like, oh, you screwed it up. One I really like is you ask someone to write. This sounds really stupid, but I saw a guy do it, like a programmer when I started my career that I quite respected. He was like he's one of those programmers that at the time I was like, man, this guy's antisocial, and now I'm like, big props to this guy. He used to basically be like, I'm not going to meetings, I'm just going to do code. I remember when we were using dependency injection in Spring, he was like, I just have a file where I instantiate all my variables and pass them into one another. And now I think if I was doing that stuff, that Spring stuff's so complicated. I think actually he was probably onto something, because at that time we had all these massive XML files. And we just spent all day debugging them. And
Spring XML is not what it's about.
And he was just like, nah. But anyway, I went to an interview with him, and we were interviewing a candidate, and he said, can you write a function? We were interviewing in Java, but it doesn't really matter, where that takes an array of integers and returns the mean, so the average. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And you would be surprised how many candidates that we interviewed got very confused, or made really it's not that if someone nails that question, it doesn't really tell you a lot. You're like, they probably should be able to write a function which returns the mean. It's not that complicated. But if they balls it up, you're like,
how are they ballsing that up?
Just different things. People
not
freak out.
I
think it's a bit of a mean question, because it's almost quite simple.
That's a good pun there.
Well, mean question. It's an average question. No, it's a mean question, but I don't know, people, and then you can extend it and you can say what happens. Can you think of any error cases?
So it's interesting. I see what you mean about that. I just to interrupt you there, I thought there was an interesting question we asked when we were interviewing I just remembered actually, when we were interviewing in my old job at the big team where I first learned KDB. we got these sort of young guys in who didn't know the language, so it was very hard to be.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah.
You know, so it'd be interesting to see what you thought about this question. Somebody was like, let's ask a very open-ended question to see how they think. And the open-ended question was, if we will give you, forget the language, it's all sort of pseudo language. There is a table of data, and we want you to tell us as much about this data set as you can. What sort of information would you be able to give us? Like, tell us about this data set, right?
That's interesting.
So
that is open-ended.
Yeah, so it's open-ended, but the number of people that would not even be able to say, like, how many rows it had or how many columns it had.
Oh, really?
You know what I mean? Like
just common sense.
Just start really basic. So people would go in the deep end being like, well, is there? Can I do like averages of the? And we'd be like, well, how do you know there are any number columns?
Yeah.
How do you know what columns there are? How do you know how many rows there are? And it was a slightly mean question because open-ended ones can be very difficult in an interview because obviously the interviewee is quite stressed.
Yeah.
So to give them something where you're actually expecting something quite easy can actually trip them up more than a difficult question. But it was interesting, again, from, like you're saying, seeing people not be able to start simple and just going straight to the most complicated solution.
I think you often in interviews you get signals which are... You almost have like... I don't know if this is true. I'll say it and then we can review what my thought. But you almost have like two different signals. One is just a big nope where someone does something and you think, oh, that was not good. And then there's kind of like fair enough. And I think really someone that gets through an interview is a big part of it is just they have no nopes or very few nopes and just enough kind of, that was sensible. And that's kind of it really. But you do see people like...
But that bar changes depending on how senior the person's supposed to be as well, right?
Yes.
So more junior, you'd be like, yeah, that's not right. But we can... I mean, the other part of an interview, I guess, is for them to give an answer and you to suggest why it isn't correct. Like I hate interviews where they give an answer and the interview, or I gave an answer and the interviews go, yeah, okay.
You kind of want to see them go, oh yeah, no, I agree, yeah.
Yeah, either yes, I agree, or I don't agree, and this is the reason. Because I think otherwise, no one really knows what's going on at that point.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of responsibility as the interviewer.
Yeah.
To really not, and I think the more junior the person is, like we were going into an interview, and you've got that confidence from having a lot of time, having a lot of jobs, and if the interviewer isn't the best behaved and they don't make you feel that way, you'll probably just get over it. But like I think I noticed with these junior guys that
they
lack
take it
of
quite personally.
they take it personally, and the lack of you don't know what they're thinking. Like when I interview people, I mean, maybe this is just me being a bit of a dick, but when I interview people, like you said earlier on, I interviewed some people recently for Node, and I just asked them questions until I felt that they couldn't answer them anymore. And I just started off quite simple and just got more and more complicated till the fact that it was like quite obscure, really difficult things or things I thought they wouldn't know. And in the end, they didn't know. But I just wanted to know where they were at. It wasn't like me saying, you're rubbish because you don't know this super obscure thing. It's just like, wanted to see if I was sitting opposite, one of
the authors.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, the guy that wrote JavaScript, or like an ex-Facebook employee or something that knows all this stuff. And it's like you just want to know kind of where the failure point is.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, but it's not necessarily like you got something you didn't know some things. And I think how people handle that as well. Sort of saying, I'm sorry, I don't know. I would maybe guess it's this, or I would look it up here, or I would whatever it is, but.
Because I think as a developer, you can never assume... I think anyone who thinks they know everything about a language is inherently wrong.
Yeah.
So,
Or everything about anything. Kind of more genuine,
yeah. But as in, in this particular space, if you get a guy coming in being ridiculously cocky, being like, I've done this for 10 years, I know everything there is to know about it. It's like, well... Realistically, we're going to now have to test that.
Exactly. So one of my guys got asked, I think there have been 2 interview questions that my guys have been asked, I didn't know the answers to, and they're like junior, and I'm supposed to be senior in inverted commas, and it's like, well, they come back and I'm like, well, I genuinely don't know the answer to that one. I would have to have looked it up.
But again, I think part of that, like you said, is how do you react to not knowing?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people panic when they don't know and just make up crap.
It's easier said than done, but never panic. Is the key. Like you need to. I think if you have that confidence and self-worth that like you do know what you're doing, and if someone asks you a question you don't know, then perhaps there's a reason for that. It's kind of how I feel. Like maybe one option is that it's a stupid question. Like some of the questions that my guys got asked that I didn't know was because it was a stupid question, and they were kind of like saying like, how does this thing work in like some JavaScript feature that you should never use because it's like really dangerous? And it's like, well, I don't know, because
What was it, like using a vowel or something?
yeah, like I can't remember what it was. There was like there have been some weird, like low level, strange things that we just never come across, and we've been working 5 developers across like 4 projects for a couple of years, and we've just never seen these things.
Yeah.
And, we've used the stack loads, and it's kind of like, so I think the whiteboardy computer science stuff, unless there's a specific need for that job, and I can see there maybe sometimes will be. I can see if you're building something like Redis. Or if you're building probably the KDB core team, the way they would interview would be very different from the way we would, because I'm guessing it's proper rocket science.
Yeah. There'll be a lot to it, yeah, for sure.
I think trivia questions, I kind of stand by to just get a sense that someone is not sort of telling fibs on their CV, and they're
So that is, by trivia you mean like language feature questions?
almost facts. Yeah, like whatever it's about. Like they say they know Lodash, and you'll be like, name 3 functions you might use in Lodash, just to sort of check that you're not like that guy's a genius because he knows about like map reduce and filter. But you're thinking, that they're clearly not like BSing me. So I think that's probably fair, but if you start asking really obscure questions and then judging a candidate based on that, that's perhaps... it depends, again, if you're hiring someone who is to be your node expert.
Yeah. Then you're well within your rights to do
But
that.
if you're hiring someone to like... Most programmer jobs are not that. They're like, business person wants X to happen and they need to get it done. They don't necessarily need to... They can Google anything. And that's another reason why these interviews are a bit unrealistic, because we're all good. It's not a secret,
Everybody, you're always going to look stuff up.
We're looking stuff up. I don't know if you're still tracking your Google searches, but we're probably benching like 100 a day when we're programming. I'm guessing most developers are.
Yeah.
Stack Overflow.
Yeah,
Always.
particularly if I'm in Java or like playing around with C++, I'm googling all the time because it gets the job done.
Yeah, that's how
Somebody else has had the problem before me.
Yeah, you're not going to solve it yourself. You're just going to read what they said. And sometimes it's like complicated things that you would take out days to figure out. So I think the code tests. So the timed code tests, I'm not sure how I feel about. So like a half an hour or an hour. I think they do tell you more about problem solving if that's important to you. But they will disadvantage people that are either bad with time pressure or not used to it.
Yeah.
We have a background where we're probably quite good with that. There's like, what's the word? Like, not confirmation bias, but the fact that we got into university by taking a buttload of exams, then passed university by taking a buttload more exams.
Yeah.
And then whilst at university had coding tests, which were under times, means that if you give us a coding test, we're probably not, we don't do it every day, but we're probably either just, we were built to be that way before.
By the fact that you've got through all of that, they're implying some behaviours in yourself. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, maybe the practice has helped a bit, but it's probably as much that you were just that type of person. Yeah, because you managed to get through all that stuff. So I think that can be. I guess it depends how selective you want to be. Maybe
I think it depends. I think the biggest thing here really is that you're saying, well, someone who's coming in as a web developer versus someone who's coming in as a low-level back-end developer. I think you're going to have to vary.
Yes.
What you do. And I think on the web developer side, particularly, some of the ways that interviews used to or have traditionally been done for technology, I think there's definitely scope there to improve them and modernize them, because a lot of what you're doing on the website isn't necessarily like knowing a binary search tree. I can't see how that someone as a web developer, the likelihood of coming up with that is even less likely than somebody working low-level backend.
I don't think many web developers get that. But web developers been blurred. Like, I'm sort of a web developer, a full stack developer, or whatever you want to call it, and it's all kind of proper now anyway. It used to be more seen as a lesser thing, but I don't think that's really true.
Well, no, it's more the problems you're solving with that technology, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's not going to come up.
Well, that's what I mean. Regardless of the actual language, if you're developing a website, I would imagine even less often than somebody working on some low-level C thing, you're not going to come up against a lot of those problems that we got, or a lot of the things we got taught, because there's a solution out there already and that will work. And the time to actually consider those things is at the point where you're saying, right, we need to have an optimization phase here.
Yeah. Later. Make it work. Make it neat, make it fast. It's not make it neat. But like there's something in the middle.
I think that, making it work and it not be a dog is a start.
It's fine.
And then you go, right, now we need this to be the absolute quickest thing we've ever seen. And you go, right, well, that'll take another 3 months.
Yeah.
More than the month it took to develop the original version or something.
So the only one we have, the jury's still out on for me is code tests.
Yeah.
Where they're doing a thing which is like the job that they'll be doing, which
that feels a little bit like free work.
Yes, and that's the thing. I think it depends on the length. I had an interview once, which I think was one of the best interviews I've ever had, for a contractor. I think it was like a fund, and they wanted me to do Angular.
Yeah.
And they sat me in a room with a computer that basically had more or less free access to the internet, and it had like Node and whatever installed on it already. And they said that there's some stuff installed. If you need more stuff, go nuts. There's not really any rules. There's this thing called To Do MVC. Is
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's like a to-do app that when you build a new library like React or Angular or Ember or Preact or whatever it is, Vue.js, jQuery, it's the stock application that you build to prove, you say, this is how I built it. And it's just a to-do list with checkboxes and you can check them off.
Right.
And then they get crossed out and disappear. And they said, what we want you to do is to build To Do MVC, and here's they'd actually written a spec for To Do MVC, but I'd already seen it in the past. And they said, just build some features. You don't necessarily need to get to the end. And then they had a remote session where they could watch me. And they weren't in the room with me, but they could watch. And they just checked in. And I think they were just checking in to check that I didn't just download To Do MVC from somewhere, which is fair enough. And so I started building it for about an hour and a half. And after an hour and a half, the guy came in and he was like, they came in every half an hour or so. And after an hour and a half, he was like, look, you've built enough.
Yeah.
We can see where this is going, and it's going towards a finish To Do MVC.
Yeah.
But it's just going to take like another hour or two.
Yeah.
Fine. Come and answer some more questions about some other stuff. And I think that's probably the best interview, because it was like, it was very applicable to the sort of work I'd be doing for them. There wasn't time pressure, and they were very sensible about look, you can't spend 8 hours building a To Do MVC. We can see in the spirit of, you've built some stuff, it's not finished. Whereas I think the thing with this other one we were talking about earlier on is, getting them to perfectly do the CSS. I know that they may need that, but I think there's just no kind of give or take. I think if they paid you, if that's what they want, then I think if they pay you, it's okay.
Because getting perfect layout of a website is not a skill. It's just, there is a skill to it to a degree.
There is a bit, but not.
But a lot of it is just you've just got to spend the time. And
trial and error.
But why would you? You're not going to hire somebody being like, look, this guy can only take an hour to lay out this CSS rather than 2 hours. It's like, well, unless you're going to have a guy only doing CSS,
it's a lower skill part of that job, in my opinion. And it's if they can do the rest of it. Actually, I think that's not true. From some of the guys that work for me, some of them are definitely better at that particular thing than others, and we have talked about the fact that they need to get better at doing those things, and I think they take your view to CSS. They kind of, this isn't proper programming, so I think but
I think you have to. I mean, unless you get to the point down the line where you say, well, we have JavaScript developers and then layout people,
but
which I don't think you're ever going to get to. Then you've got to I think as a web developer take on the chin that you're going to have to do HTML and CSS.
So one thing that I have thought from watching my team go and getting jobs that would be amazing is if you could do a coding test, like one of these long ones, like a 4 or 8 hour one, and somehow verify that you did it and it was given to you and then you replied within a certain time, and I don't know, so prove that it was you. But you just do it once, and then anybody that wants to check can just say, "Oh, we saw Jas did this thing. Here it is. We know that he did it, and it looks good." Because what they're doing is kind of the same thing, but 3 or 4 times each. So they'll get asked by one company, "Can you do this code test?" And another company will ask.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
A slightly different, but basically the same technology.
Yeah. So interesting there then is open sourcing libraries, right? Basically, does that for you.
If you're open sourcing software, you can basically say, if you want to see how I write code, go and look here.
I think as an app dev though, that's tricky. And
I'm not saying it's feasible, but that is a way of doing it, right?
I think it's hard because a lot of programmers get paid to write code which is effectively closed source, and your employer. I think it's fair game. I mean, I don't know what the technical rules are. I mean, I've always said if someone wants to go on Skype or Hangouts and do a screen share and look through some code, that's different to you sending them the code, realistically. And I think that's kind of okay. So if they want to see some code you've written,
you just
screen share and say, look, this is what I'm working on. Here's a project I'm doing. I guess technically that's probably not allowed in a lot of jobs, but I don't see much blowback in most jobs because realistically they're not going to screen grab and reconstruct all the code. And if you don't show them all the files, they've only got...
It seems unlikely.
It seems unlikely. And I think it depends. Like if you work for like a financial institution, they're probably not going to be cool with that still. But like a much bigger company, but small mid companies, it's kind of like
that's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, it's kind of like a way around it because they're very keen on like what have you open sourced. A lot of these,
I guess, proving that it's your code and not just somebody else's.
That's that's another difficult thing, and the time between getting given the exercise and returning it is part of that because in the worst case you can have outsourced it to someone else to do.
To be honest, I think. As we're talking about it, I'm feeling like leaning towards getting somebody in for a shortish period of time, either sitting with them or watching them remotely, doing a relatively simple coding problem, I think has got to be the right way to go.
One of my guys, they were working on a product in like the technology that he already uses. They got him in for an interview and they just pair programmed on the project for like 2 hours. I think that's also pretty fine.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's pretty
You're
nice.
getting free work out of them though.
Still getting free work.
I do have a problem with that.
I do too. I think when you're more I think it's a beggars can't be choosers scenario when you're junior.
Yeah.
I think when you're at our level, like especially I have a billable daily rate. Like if someone asks me to effectively do 4 hours of work for them, I can very directly tie an amount of dollars or pounds to that. And it's like
you can't be doing it. I mean, even for junior people, like you've got to take it. I appreciate them getting them in, and it probably is an effective way. But at the end of the day, you're basically getting free labor, and I think you have to be wary of the ethics of that.
I think if I was hiring, I think I would really like to pay people to. I think paying them for a day or 2 days to do some stuff for you, like.
See, that's not a bad idea, right? Because you could be like, I actually have this. I have this problem that's isolated. Let's get 5 people to solve it, and whichever one we like the best, we then give a second interview to or something.
Yeah, you're going to spend a bit of cash, but you're not disrespecting anybody's time. It's
you're not.
Fair all around.
Yeah, and you're not necessarily going to pay them their normal rate, right? You could just give them like a £50 or something for the effort of doing that, spending 4 hours on it.
Even a token, even if it's half rate.
Yeah,
it's kind of meeting him in the middle, and it's a big gesture to even get halfway to a sensible rate. If you pay them like sort of 200 quid a day or something, that's kind of, that's something, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And then there's an appreciation there between...
I do like those kind of tests though, because it's like if you're hiring someone to be a barista and make coffee, and they said that they could make coffee, I'd probably want them to make me a coffee. And I feel like these interviews are kind of like that. They're very directly related to the job that you're going to be doing.
And getting them in fixes a lot of those issues of who's actually doing this, right?
Yeah.
With those other suggestions that you've made, there's always that risk that it could be not them, not their code that they're showing, or not they've got somebody else to do it. You get them in, you watch them, and you say, right, we've got an hour together, let's do something. Whichever way it is, and you see the output. If you like it, you carry on. If you don't, you go, look, we don't think you're suitable. Yeah. And you're not taking up days and days of their time, hours and hours of their time. You're taking up an hour of your time, an hour of their time, maybe 2 hours if you want to then take them to the next stage. And then, you can make a decision in that session, hopefully, that you'd be like, we could hire this person. Yeah. Not, we'll have to get you back because you need to meet every other person. You're like, let's have it where the offer gets made, and then if you want to accept it, you can come in and meet everybody, and then we're done.
Yeah, so I think not
a lot of back and forth.
I think I would do that, and I think I would probably ask them a few like almost trivia questions just to check that they know. Although to be honest, if you sit and watch them do the thing, there's maybe no need. Like, do you know React? Or I just watched you program React for like 2 hours. I think you do, so I think we're good here. So it's kind of like I'd probably ask them a few like questions, but nothing too serious. And maybe, depending on the role and the type of person I wanted, I might ask them some more generic problem-solving stuff just to check out their smarts, because programming is basically problem-solving, and that is almost an ability which is separate from... Because I think there are programmers that can do stuff with a certain set of technologies, but their general problem-solving skills are a little bit weak still.
Yeah.
So I think I'd want that.
Yeah.
And I think that would probably do me. And then all the interpersonal regular, are they human beings? Do they wear flip-flops with socks? The sort of normal things that I'd want to check. The answer obviously is yes, for those of you listening. Always wear flip-flops and socks together. But yeah, are they normal? We've had some howlers over the years. We interviewed a guy at my old job, turned up for an interview in a leather jacket at a hedge fund. Just in a leather jacket. From our university as well.
Oh dear.
With long hair and just a leather jacket. I don't mind that he has long hair, and I don't mind that he wears leather jackets. But you would think for an interview...
You've got to read the room.
Yeah, you've got to read the room, exactly. Like, turned up to like this... fancy office, kind of. Yeah, it wasn't exactly a startup job.
We've hired a couple. They have in my current place. They've hired a couple of people that people have interviewed him and said we don't think he's a good fit. They've hired him anyway, and then had to get rid of them reasonably soon afterwards.
Have you had any howlers, either hired or just interviewees that didn't make the cut? But
well, we hired basically an intern, and I said to my boss, we shouldn't hire this guy at all, because I just don't think he's suitable. And they, everyone else, because there was only 4 of us, everyone had a chat with him, and they were like, oh, I think we should give him a chance. And I was like, I don't think this is a good idea. And we hired him.
What happened?
Oh, he was a waste of space.
Yeah,
unfortunately. I mean, I spent a lot of time with him, because we took him in, and I was like, look, I'll have to make the effort, because there's no point not. Because otherwise we all lose out, because he's just going to sit there. We're paying him and he's not going to do anything. Mm-hmm. So I gave him a chance, but
it just didn't work.
He just didn't really know anything about programming at all.
Yeah. You got to. I think there's always a temptation when you're hiring you want it to work out sometimes, and I think you have to be honest with yourself. If it feels wrong,
yeah, which is why I didn't want to hire him. I said, look, let's just wait. But you get that sort of thing where you need somebody, or you feel like you need somebody, so you feel like you've got to make a decision.
When it gets hard is when you've been hiring for a role for like 6 to 8 weeks, and you're sick and tired of it. And it is draining to interview candidates all the time, and you get sloppy and desperate. But I would say, of all some of the places I've worked, the job I had at a smaller finance company, they were very selective, and they basically had a policy of everybody all the way had to say yes. And if one person said no, that maybe it would get vetoed, but I always felt like they would be like, you know what? There was just that mutual... It was, in some ways, it was bad, because it was almost like an elitist club of like, we're all good enough and we've all then been selective to get in. So the new person has to be upheld to our collective standard.
Yeah.
And I think probably actually you lose a few candidates because they're unconventional, and you've got, a bunch of male, stale.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, that
reasonably, yeah.
It's something I wanted to. I think I would like to talk about later on in the podcast, is about that diversity issue that you're going to get, or you do get in our industry. Perhaps back off the back of this and off the back of that, right? I assume you had majority male employees there, majority potentially white.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, and I think we should talk about that another time.
So I think it can be, but I think we solved it though. So cheeky actual code of what they'd be doing tests, but don't take too long.
Yeah.
Or like do an hour and a half and just be like, yeah, you kind of look like you know what you're doing, or pay them and do longer if that's what you want, and then get them in, or get them in to do that, even if you're going to pay them, and then get them in, ask them a few sort of technical questions, and maybe do some problem solving, and then check that they don't wear funny clothes or any other, or that communication is obviously a tremendously large part of software development, even though we'd like to pretend it isn't.
And I think if you're small enough, you want to get as many people in the company to meet this person.
Yeah, it works both ways. I think once you're like yes, or once a core group of interviewers have a feeling of yes, then any person that person's going to interface with should pretty much meet them for both people's sake.
So like I was in a company of 4, right? So if we're interviewing somebody and I go,
You've all got to meet them.
yeah, exactly,
For sure.
And even up to maybe 10 or 15, you want the majority of people. You're all going to highly likely to be in the same office. You need to all be able to get along, and so I think the personal interactions are obviously what make or break a company, particularly a small company. In a big company, there's a lot. You can somehow be shielded from some of the bad stuff by if you've got a good team around you directly. The fact there's some idiots around you, you can sort of
Invariably, there are. Yeah.
Well, in a big company, you're more likely to hire. There's a lot higher chance of having a lot of different type of people that you're not necessarily going to get on with. So, I think it's solved.
But we're definitely anti computer sciencey, crappy.
It sounds. There'll be some people who'll be like, "Oh, well, that's ridiculous." Of course, you've got to ask that. But really, I think you have to just sit back and say, realistically, how many times are you considering big O notation in your daily programming life?
The only time I think there's a case to be made is that if you're hiring someone straight out of university that basically has no professional experience, then maybe and you're hiring computer science graduates, then maybe the only sensible thing to test them on is their university course.
Yep, I agree with that.
But you wouldn't. I don't know. You wouldn't. They don't.
But most people in computer science courses will have done some programming, right? So
yeah, you would
focus more on. You did Java. Okay, how much do you know about Java?
Yeah.
And up to what level are you comfortable?
And it's always a strange subset of computer science. It's never like most computer science courses will involve a bit of maths. You'll never see maths. You'll never see like set theory. You'll never see like, any other bits of computer science. It's just kind of like algorithmic-y and data structures.
So what's actually a really interesting point you've just made there, I think we need to probably wrap up, but I actually find something that I do think is useful is set theory.
Oh.
Because if you think about, like, in terms of data storage collections, it's quite interesting to think about things in terms of sets, like in terms of unioning, distincting, intersections. I'm not talking about advanced set theory here, I'm talking about basic set theory. But like operators that I think are really, really powerful within KDB, but then I would apply to other languages, is thinking of sets and being like, well, I want to append, like say you have a list and you want to add another element, but you only want a unique, make sure each element's unique. That's what union does, right?
Yeah.
Or intersect, or
yeah, maybe you get exposed to this a lot more than me, because I guess with databases there's a bit more of it just naturally in there.
I guess bit. You think, and I just think, I mean, they're the reason I use them a lot is because they're quite low level operators. So you end up using like except to take the elements out of lists.
Yeah.
So that's like whatever their equivalent is in set theory. I guess.
There's something.
And so I'm not saying, I'm not talking about advanced set theory at all, but it's just interesting.
They never ask it.
No, exactly. And I think actually,
big O.
If you think about Java, the set interface there is actually quite interesting. It's quite useful. You get like maps and stuff. You get entry sets and things where they're unordered unordered sets of information rather than lists, which have an inherent order to them. Just quite interesting.
Yeah.
Being able to do things like distinct. Just give me the distinct.
Yeah, distinct's useful. That's an SQL as well. Yeah.
Well, that's a set thing, right? It's a set theory thing.
So that's our advice for Philip anyway. So no, none of those types of questions. Keep it real and pay them, Philip, if you need to.
Or give them a tax break.
All
right, cool. Well, we've nearly hit the 3 hour mark.
Oh.
So I think we should stop.
I am feeling tired.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye.